In a world where wealth and control seem to define success, Ethan Williams has everything anyone could ever dream of, except the one thing that truly matters: his daughter. Sophie, at 7 years old, is trapped in a silence no one can break, leaving Ethan to face a reality he never saw coming. But when an unexpected encounter with 3 young boys changes everything, Ethan must confront not just his daughter's condition, but the secrets that threaten to unravel his entire life. Keep reading and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this. Ethan Williams sat in his office, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his sleek, modern mansion. He was a man who had everything: money, power, and a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. As the CEO of a global tech empire, Ethan was used to having control over his company, his investments, and every aspect of his life. But there was one thing that eluded him: his daughter, Sophie. Sophie, at 7 years old, suffered from a rare neurological condition that left her unable to communicate in any conventional way. She had once been a bright, curious child, filled with laughter and wonder. But over the past few months, things had changed. Sophie had regressed, becoming more withdrawn with each passing day. She no longer responded to her name, to voices, or to anything that once brought her joy. She was trapped in a world of silence, and Ethan, despite spending countless hours and millions of dollars on the best specialists, had no idea how to bring her back. It had been a particularly difficult morning. Another failed attempt at therapy had left Sophie more unresponsive than ever. Ethan's heart weighed heavily in his chest as he watched her from the doorway of her room. Her small frame, lying motionless in the bed, was a painful reminder that no amount of wealth could solve this. He ran a hand over his face, frustration rising. He couldn't fix this, couldn't control it, and that fact left him feeling more powerless than he had ever felt before. As the silence in the room stretched on, Ethan noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a soft sound, a light tapping at the door. He turned, startled, and saw the caregiver standing there looking uncertain. "Mr. Williams," she said softly, "there are 3 boys here to see Sophie." Ethan frowned. "Boys? I wasn't expecting anyone." "They've been here before," she explained hesitantly. "They wanted to try something with her, to see if they could reach her. They've done it before. Just give them a chance." Ethan's first instinct was to dismiss them, but something in the caregiver's eyes made him hesitate. Perhaps, for once, he could allow someone else to take a crack at this. After all, nothing else had worked. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine, let them in." Moments later, 3 boys, no older than 7, walked into the room. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. They were so young, so innocent, yet their presence felt strangely powerful. The oldest, Tommy, was a natural leader, his face bright with determination. Sam, the middle child, was quieter, more reserved, while Leo, the youngest, had an unexplainable calmness about him. They didn't seem intimidated by the large, cold mansion, or the fact that they were standing in the presence of one of the wealthiest men in the world. They simply seemed to know what they were doing. Tommy approached Sophie first, holding up a small handheld device. It emitted a series of soft beeps and tones, nothing overwhelming, just a simple series of sounds. Sophie didn't move, but Ethan noticed something. There was a shift in her eyes, a flicker of awareness. Tommy pressed a button, and the beeps changed pitch. Sophie's eyelids twitched. Next, Sam stepped forward with a stack of cards, each one displaying pictures and words. He held them up slowly in front of Sophie, one by one, showing her animals, objects, even people. He didn't say a word, just held the cards steady in front of her, waiting. And then there was Leo, the youngest, who didn't bring any devices or cards. Instead, he sat down beside Sophie on the bed and simply began humming, a soft, melodic tune that seemed to resonate through the room. As his voice filled the silence, Sophie's lips parted ever so slightly. It was barely noticeable, but for Ethan, it felt like the most significant moment of his life. His daughter, who hadn't responded to anyone in weeks, was reacting to these boys. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He watched in stunned silence as Sophie, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, seemed to connect. Her hand twitched. Her fingers curled slightly. A small, fragile smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing. How was this possible? These boys, these strangers, had done what no doctor or specialist could do. They had reached Sophie in a way that he, with all his wealth and resources, couldn't. When the session ended, Ethan found himself at a loss for words. His emotions were tangled: gratitude, suspicion, disbelief. He walked toward the boys, his thoughts clouded. "Thank you," he said, his voice strained. "But I think it's best if we don't try this again." The boys looked up at him, their expressions unreadable. Tommy gave a small nod, as if he understood, before turning to leave. Sam and Leo followed him out, the silence in the room once again overwhelming. Ethan stood there, staring at his daughter, who had once again fallen into stillness, but this time there was something different. A sliver of hope. As Ethan stood by Sophie's side, something deep inside him stirred: dread, curiosity, and a desperate need to understand. Who were these boys? And why had Sophie reacted to them in a way she hadn't to anyone else? Ethan had spent so much time trying to fix Sophie. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to find out what else he had been missing all along. The following days were a blur for Ethan. Sophie's brief moments of responsiveness haunted him as he struggled with an overwhelming mixture of hope and confusion. The three boys had come into their lives unexpectedly, but their impact had been undeniable. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in that room. Despite his initial reaction to dismiss them, a part of him felt a desperate need to understand why Sophie had reacted to them, why they were able to break through her silence when no one else had. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He had to know more. Ethan decided to seek out the boys, against his better judgment. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite articulate. His obsession with solving Sophie's condition had left him emotionally distant, but now something about those boys had shattered that detachment. He had to know their story, who they were, and how they had done what no one else could. He tracked them down to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The houses were small, tucked between larger, more expensive homes, a stark contrast to Ethan's sprawling mansion. His heart tightened as he drove through the narrow streets, his thoughts racing. What was he walking into? As he approached a small, weathered house at the end of the street, he saw the boys sitting on the porch, laughing and playing. Their carefree energy was so different from Ethan's own world, a world defined by control, precision, and perfection. The boys looked up when they saw him, and for a moment the playfulness in their eyes flickered with uncertainty. Tommy, the oldest, stood up first, dusting off his pants. "You came back," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and cautious curiosity. Ethan hesitated before responding, his voice tight. I had to know more about you, about what you did with my daughter." Tommy looked at his brothers before nodding. "We didn't do anything special. We just know how to reach people, sometimes in ways others can't." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard stories of gifted children, but this was something different. "How?" he asked, the word barely escaping his lips. Before Tommy could respond, an older woman stepped out onto the porch, a woman whose face was lined with age, but whose eyes carried a sharp, knowing look. Her presence silenced the boys immediately. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice calm but commanding. Ethan's stomach tightened. There was something about her that immediately unsettled him. She had an air of authority, like she had seen everything the world had to offer and wasn't impressed by much. "I'm Ethan Williams," he said, forcing his voice to steady. "I'm the father of Sophie, the girl you helped." The woman studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I'm their grandmother," she said, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to size him up, "and I think we need to talk." Ethan swallowed hard. This wasn't just a conversation about Sophie anymore. He had stepped into something far deeper than he had anticipated. The woman led him inside, and as he crossed the threshold, the weight of the room seemed to settle over him. The walls were covered with old photographs, some faded with age, others in pristine condition. a life lived, one that was somehow connected to his own, but in ways he didn't understand. They sat at a small, worn table in the corner of the room. The grandmother, whose name Ethan learned was Clara, studied him intently, as if weighing his every word. "You're wondering how they did it," Clara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was surprisingly soft, given her commanding presence. "How they connected with your daughter?" Ethan nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes. How? Why?" Clara let out a deep sigh, leaning back in her chair. "It's not something you can understand easily, Mr. Williams. The boys, Tommy, Sam, and Leo, they've always had a gift, a way of seeing the world and people around them differently. They can reach into places other people can't." She paused, her gaze turning distant, as if recalling something painful. "They've always been able to see what others cannot. And Sophie wasn't just a challenge. She was a calling." Ethan frowned, trying to process her words. "A calling? What do you mean?" Clara's eyes met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw something beyond the hard exterior she had put up. There was vulnerability there, a deep, painful understanding. "I wasn't just their grandmother, Mr. Williams. I worked for your family for 20 years. I was the governess in your home, and I know things that your family doesn't want you to know." Ethan's heart raced as the words began to fall into place. He felt a cold chill creep down his spine. "What are you talking about?" His voice was barely a whisper. Clara looked at him, her face unreadable. "The boys, they're your sons, Mr. Williams. Tommy, Sam, and Leo, they're your children." The room seemed to tilt beneath him. The world spun as Clara's words sank in. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He couldn't breathe. His mind was racing. This couldn't be real. His own children, hidden from him, kept from him by the very family he had trusted. Clara didn't wait for him to respond. She continued, her voice steady but tinged with something almost bitter. "When you were young, you had a relationship with my daughter. Your family wanted to bury it, cover it up. When she became pregnant, they forced her to leave, sent her away. They told you nothing, and you never asked. They hid the truth from you, from everyone. And now, here you are, trying to fix what you never knew was broken." Ethan sat frozen, his mind reeling, his family, his own flesh and blood, hidden, erased. How had he never known? How could he not have seen the truth? Tommy, Sam, and Leo were his sons, his own flesh and blood, and yet they had grown up without him, without the father they should have had. The weight of the revelation hit him like a wave, threatening to crush him under its force. The silence between them grew thick, suffocating. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice barely audible. I never knew. How could I have known?" Clara's eyes softened. "You didn't, but now you do. And you have a choice to make, Mr. Williams. You can walk away, leave it all in the past, or you can face the truth, face your children, and do what's right." Ethan didn't know how to respond. His world was unraveling, and he had no idea what would come next. But one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. As Ethan left the house, the weight of Clara's words hung heavily over him. His family's secrets, buried for so long, had come to light in the most unexpected way, and now he was faced with a decision that would change everything. Would he confront the truth, or would he walk away from the past he never knew existed? But in his heart, he already knew. The path ahead would be anything but easy. Ethan spent the next few days in a fog, unable to shake the truth that had been revealed to him. His family, the one he had relied on, the one he had always thought was untouchable, had buried a secret so deep, so painful, that it left him questioning everything. His mind replayed Clara's words over and over again. "The boys are your sons." Each time he thought about it, a wave of guilt washed over him, mixing with disbelief. How had he not known? How had his family managed to hide this from him for so many years? More than that, how had he not suspected something? He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life, to know every detail, to be aware of everything. But now he realized how much he had missed, how much had been kept from him. Sophie's condition, once the central focus of his life, now felt like a distant concern compared to the enormity of this revelation. The boys, his sons, had grown up without him. without a father, without his love, and they had no idea who he really was. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him. He had been so absorbed in his own quest for success, so consumed by the need to control everything, that he had allowed this to happen. He had let his family's secrecy dictate his life, and now it was all falling apart. The worst part was that he couldn't undo it. He couldn't rewind time and be there for the boys, for Tommy, Sam, and Leo. He couldn't go back and fix what had been broken, and as much as he wanted to pretend that it wasn't his fault, deep down, he knew better. He had abandoned them. And now they were standing in front of him, looking at him with eyes full of anger, confusion, and betrayal. They deserved so much more than what he had given them, and he wasn't sure if it was even possible to repair the damage. But he had to try. For Sophie, for them, for himself. Ethan made his decision. He would go back to Clara's house. He would face his sons, confront the past, and do whatever it took to make things right. He couldn't change the past, but he could control what happened from this moment forward. That evening, he drove back to the same small house, his heart pounding in his chest. The boys were outside, as they had been before, but this time there was no laughter. They were sitting quietly on the porch, waiting, perhaps for something that would never come. Tommy stood first when he saw Ethan approaching. There was no joy in his eyes, no warmth, only the cold gaze of someone who had been betrayed. Sam and Leo stood beside him, both looking at Ethan with a mix of anger and hurt. Ethan stopped in front of them, his mouth dry. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence between them was thick with unresolved emotions. "I know I've done something unforgivable," Ethan began, his voice shaky but determined. "And I don't expect any of you to forgive me, but I need you to understand. I didn't know about you. I didn't know about what happened with your mother, or why I wasn't there. I failed you. I failed all of you." Tommy's jaw tightened, and he crossed his arms over his chest. "You don't get to just walk in here and say that," he snapped. "You don't get to act like you care now, after all these years." "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "But I want to try. I want to be here for you now, for all of you. I know it's not enough, but I'm asking for a chance. A chance to be the father I should have been. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want to be a part of your lives. If you'll let me." There was a long pause before Tommy spoke again, his voice low and filled with emotion. "You want to be a part of our lives? You didn't even know we existed? How can you just expect us to let you in?" Ethan's heart sank. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't prepared for the magnitude of the pain in Tommy's words. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you, except a chance to prove that I can be the father you deserve." For a long moment the boys didn't say anything. They just stood there looking at Ethan, processing the words that had been spoken, the history that had been revealed. Ethan didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of something. Whether it was the beginning of healing or the beginning of further pain, he didn't know, but he had to try. Finally Sam spoke, his voice softer than Tommy's, but still carrying the weight of years of hurt. "It's not that simple," he said, looking at Ethan with a guarded expression. "You can't just come in and make everything right. It's not that easy." Ethan nodded. "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Leo, the youngest, who had said nothing up until that point, suddenly looked up at Ethan. "What if we don't want you here?" His voice was small, but the pain in it was unmistakable. Ethan's heart broke at the question. He had no answer. All he could do was stand there, knowing that the damage he had caused was deep and that it would take a lifetime to repair, if it was even possible to repair at all. But as he looked at the three boys, his sons, he realized that he couldn't just walk away. No matter how difficult, no matter how painful, he had to try, for them, for Sophie, for himself. The silence hung between them for a moment longer before Ethan spoke again. "I won't give up," he said, his voice firm, though his heart was heavy. "I won't give up on any of you." The weight of Ethan's words lingered in the air as he turned and walked away, leaving the boys to process everything he had just said. His path ahead was uncertain, and the road to redemption seemed impossibly long, but for the first time in years he felt the stirrings of hope, however fragile, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. The past was heavy, but the future was still unwritten, and Ethan had a long way to go before he could make things right. The days following Ethan's visit to Clara's house were long and filled with a painful mixture of hope and regret. He couldn't shake the weight of his conversation with the boys. It haunted him, the harsh reality of what he had missed, the years lost, the love that had never been given, the wounds left open by his absence. He thought of Sophie every minute, but the guilt over Tommy, Sam and Leo gnawed at him constantly. He had to find a way to heal their wounds. But how? Could time even heal such deep scars? Ethan's days were filled with meetings, phone calls, and the relentless pace of his business. But each day he found his mind wandering back to the boys, to their faces, their words. He had been so consumed with fixing Sophie that he had completely ignored his own flesh and blood. Now that he was aware of them, now that the truth had shattered everything he thought he knew, he couldn't just move on. He couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine, and he certainly couldn't ignore them. Determined to take the first step, Ethan decided to visit the boys again. He needed to show them he wasn't going to give up. He needed to prove that he could be a father. He didn't know where this would lead, or if they would even give him a chance, but he had to try. When he arrived at Clara's house that afternoon, the boys were nowhere to be found. Clara was sitting on the porch, rocking slowly in an old chair, looking like she had been waiting for him. "You're back," she said softly, her eyes sharp, yet weary. There was something in her voice that told Ethan she had seen more than her share of pain, but also a flicker of something else, hope. Ethan nodded, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I need to talk to them. I know it's going to be hard, but I can't keep going on like this. I have to at least try." Clara studied him for a moment before motioning toward the road. "They're at the park down the street. They won't come to you, Ethan. You'll have to meet them where they are." Ethan's chest tightened. He had no illusions about how difficult this would be, but the truth was, he had no other choice. If he didn't do this now, he might never get the chance again. He thanked Clara, his voice rough with emotion, before walking down the street toward the small park Clara had pointed to. As he walked, memories of his own childhood, the laughter, the summer days spent playing with friends, flashed through his mind. But there were no such memories for the boys. Their childhood had been marked by pain and neglect, and he was the cause of it. When Ethan reached the park, he saw them. The three boys were sitting on a bench, their faces turned toward the ground. Tommy, Sam, and Leo, his sons. They looked like any other boys, carefree, young, but Ethan could see the walls they had built around themselves. He could see the anger and the hurt, too. Tommy was the first to notice him. His eyes narrowed, and his lips pressed into a thin line. Sam and Leo didn't even look up. "I know you don't want to see me," Ethan began, his voice shaky but firm. "But I'm here because I'm not going to run from this. I've run from enough in my life, and I'm not running anymore." The silence stretched between them, and for a moment Ethan thought they might walk away. But Tommy spoke, his voice rough and full of emotion. "You don't get it," he said, his voice low. "You're not some hero who gets to walk in and fix everything. You can't just show up after all these years and think it's going to be fine. We don't need you to fix anything. We don't need anything from you." "I know," Ethan whispered. "I know I can't fix everything, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to be a part of your lives. I know I can't undo the past, but I can be here now, if you'll let me." Sam, who had been silent until now, looked up at Ethan, his eyes full of skepticism. "Why now?" he asked. "Why didn't you come before? We were kids, and you didn't even care enough to find out if we were okay." Ethan swallowed hard. The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. He had no good answer. He couldn't justify his absence, couldn't explain why he had turned away from the reality of his own children. He had let his family's secrets define his life, and now he was paying the price. "I can't explain why I didn't come sooner," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. but I can promise you this. I'll be here now, no matter what it takes." Leo, who had been the quietest of the three, finally spoke. His voice was small, almost hesitant. "Why should we believe you?" Ethan took a deep breath, stepping closer to them. "Because I'm not going anywhere, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I'm here. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. I can be the father you deserved all along." For a long time, no one said anything. Ethan stood there, waiting, hoping. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. He couldn't promise them a perfect future, but he could promise them his presence. He could promise that he wouldn't walk away again. Finally, Tommy stood up. His expression was hard, but there was something softer in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. "We don't know if we can trust you," he said quietly, "but we'll give you a chance. That's all we can do." Ethan felt a surge of relief, mixed with a deep sense of responsibility. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a happy ending, but it was a start, a fragile beginning. As they stood there, the weight of the past still heavy between them, Ethan realized something. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about being present, about showing up when it mattered. It was about making the choice to stay, no matter how hard it got. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was finally starting to understand what it meant to be a father. The road ahead was still uncertain, but as Ethan walked back to his car, he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. He had taken the first step, and in doing so, he had started to build something he never thought possible, a future with his sons, a chance to heal the wounds of the past, and just maybe, he could learn to be the father they needed. The following weeks were a delicate balancing act for Ethan. His life had always been a whirlwind of business meetings, high-stakes decisions, and endless responsibilities. But now, everything had shifted. The weight of his new role, being a father to Tommy, Sam, and Leo, felt more profound than anything he had ever experienced. He was no longer just the CEO of a tech empire. Now he was trying to be present, trying to make up for years of absence. But that didn't come easily. Trust, once broken, was not easily mended. The boys were slowly letting him into their lives, but it wasn't without hesitation. Every conversation felt like a cautious step forward, and each attempt at bonding was met with a wall that was just a little harder to climb. Tommy was the hardest to reach. He had the sharpest words and the most guarded heart. Sam, more reserved, still had his doubts, but was beginning to show small signs of trust. Leo, the youngest, was still unsure, but Ethan could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the longing for something he hadn't had before, a father's love. Ethan knew they weren't ready to forgive him, not yet, and he didn't expect them to be. But he wasn't going to give up. The first few visits had been awkward, strained. They met at Clara's house, where the boys were most comfortable, but with each visit, Ethan did his best to show up without pretense, without trying to fix things. He simply wanted to be there, to make up for the time lost. One afternoon, after spending a few hours at the park with the boys, Ethan found himself sitting on a bench by himself, staring at the ground. He felt a moment of defeat creeping in. It was like a slow burn. How could he make things right when everything felt so wrong? But as his thoughts spiraled, he heard footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Tommy walking toward him, his face set in that familiar, hard expression. Tommy sat down beside him, not saying a word at first. The silence stretched between them, but Ethan didn't mind. He had learned that sometimes silence was the best thing they could share. It was Tommy who broke it. "I don't know why I'm even here," he muttered, not looking at Ethan. "Why should I believe you now? Why should I let you in after everything?" Ethan's heart tightened, but he didn't rush to answer. He had been asked these questions before, and he knew that words were not enough. It was the actions, the small moments, the time spent that would slowly begin to heal the cracks. "I don't have an answer that will make everything okay," Ethan said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for the years I've lost with you, but I promise you this, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for whatever you need, and I'll keep showing up even when it's hard." Tommy was quiet for a moment, his eyes cast downward. "I don't know if I can believe you," he said, the words coming out slowly, like they were being forced. But I guess I'll give you a chance. That's all I can do right now. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. That's all I'm asking for. A chance. The silence returned, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like something had shifted, like a small crack in the wall between them had begun to form. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next few weeks were marked by these small victories. Ethan began to attend the boys' school events, sitting quietly in the back, trying not to intrude. He took them to the movies, to their favorite pizza place. Simple things, but things they had never experienced with him before. There were still moments of tension, moments when they would shut down or retreat back into the walls they had built. But slowly, very slowly, Ethan felt them beginning to open up to him. One evening, after a long day of work, Ethan arrived at Clara's house to find the boys playing in the backyard. He approached them cautiously, unsure if they would be receptive to him showing up uninvited. But as he walked closer, Leo, the youngest, turned around and ran toward him. "Dad!" Leo shouted, his voice full of excitement, before jumping into Ethan's arms. Ethan's heart stopped. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Leo to call him that, not yet, not after everything that had happened. But there it was, the word, raw and innocent, escaping from the child who had longed for this connection. Ethan's arms instinctively wrapped around Leo, holding him close. Tommy and Sam were watching from a distance, their expressions unreadable. Tommy's face was still hard, but there was something softer in his eyes now. Sam stood silently, his hands shoved into his pockets, but Ethan could see the way his shoulders had relaxed. They were watching, seeing Ethan with Leo, and for the first time, they weren't shutting him out completely. "I'm trying," Ethan whispered to Leo, his voice barely audible. Leo grinned and pulled back, looking up at him. "I know," he said simply. Ethan looked at the other boys, his heart swelling. "I know I can't fix everything overnight," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I'm here, and I'll keep being here for as long as it takes." There was a long pause before Tommy spoke up, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful than before. "You don't have to fix everything," he said. "Just don't disappear again." Ethan's eyes stung. He nodded, his throat tight. "I won't." As they stood together in that quiet backyard, Ethan realized that healing wasn't about finding a quick fix. It wasn't about trying to erase the past or make everything perfect. It was about showing up. It was about being present in the moments that mattered, even when it was hard. Ethan hadn't just gained a second chance to be a father. He had gained something far more precious. He had gained the opportunity to slowly rebuild the relationship with his sons, one small step at a time. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely lost. There was still a long road ahead.